The traditional domain for the Cogent DataHub has been engineering, manufacturing, and industrial process control applications. Our core focus has always been real-time data. 2 years ago, when we released DataHub WebView, it was met with lots of excitement because it allows users to build state-of-the-art web visualizations quickly and easily. Over the past year or so, our customers have expressed much interest in using DataHub WebView to build management information portals and decision support dashboards. They want to be able to integrate real-time data and ODBC database content to build comprehensive enterprise solutions. In this short video, I'll illustrate our new scripting and ODBC capability. Here's a mock-up of the page that I want to create. In the top left corner, I want a list of employees, and when I select an employee, I want to display the employee's profile, and I want to trigger ODBC queries securely via DataHub that return order and sales information, which I'll use to populate a data table and a pie chart. So to get started, I'm going to go to the Cogent DataHub and actually define the queries that we're going to use to access information in the database. Let me start by just minimizing this screen and showing you that sitting on my desktop right here, I have a copy of Microsoft Access Northwind database, which of course is a sample database that Microsoft has used for years and years, ever since Microsoft Access was introduced in the early 90s. I'm going to use that database just because it's something that most people have access to or can play with. So using the Cogent DataHub properties window, we have new functionality on the data logging tab, specifically down here at the bottom. We've got capability that allows us to create queries for an ODBC database, and I'm just going to click the configure button, and let me just drag that window over here. And this allows us to create an ODBC DSN and then use that DSN to create SQL or SQL queries. So let me start by creating a new DSN for the Northwind database. I'm going to add a Microsoft Access database. So I'm going to choose the Microsoft Access ODBC driver and hit finish. And then I am going to select the database that I want, which is going to come, in my case, from users can desktop, and there it is, Northwind. And I'll just give this a name of Northwind and sample data for my management portal. And I'll hit OK on that, and I'll close the ODBC Data Source Administrator, and that should have now provided me with a DSN, there it is, inside this list. So I'm going to select the Northwind DSN and hit connect, and sure enough it was able to successfully connect to that database. The next thing I'm going to do is create a number of queries. There's actually 5 different queries that I want to create for this sample application. And let me just very quickly walk you through a couple of them to give you a perspective of what I want to do. I'm going to start by creating a very simple query, which I'm going to give a name. Let me just move this up so I can have both of these on my screen at the same time here. I want to give this query a name of NW Northwind, all employees, and the SQL that we're actually going to use is very, very straightforward. It's just selecting various fields from the employees table, including a calculated field, first name plus space plus last name as full name. This is not a parameterized query. We're just going to grab all of the employee information. Well, if I try to submit that, I'll notice that sure enough it does seem to work. I do have information that has been output and is available for me here. What I'd like to be able to do is just to illustrate how WebView can accommodate changes or detect changes. I'm just going to set this up to automatically re-execute every second, and I'm going to emit the entire data set into a point, and I'm going to emit that into a brand new data domain called Northwind, and I will just give it the name of all employees. And so when I create that and hit modify, excuse me, I've already done that. I hit create and then I hit apply. That should now create for me a brand new data point in the data browser that is updated every second. So let me just very quickly return here to the data properties window, and I'm going to choose view data, and I'll notice that there is the Northwind data domain, and that has now been created. So similarly, I should be able to create another query. Let me just go back here again, minimize that. I'm going to create a second query called NW all customers. So let's do the same thing, all customers, and I'm going to grab the SQL and I'll dump it in there. This time I'm going to output that data to the all customers data point. And this one does not need to be re-executed as often. In fact, it probably doesn't need to re-execute often at all, but I'll just set it up to run every 10 seconds. And again, I'm going to hit create and hit apply. And when I now come back to the data browser, I should see, and there they are. In fact, I've got two different queries or two different data points that have been populated with data, all employees and all customers. Okay, let me just continue here by adding a few other queries that we're going to need. I mentioned that we're going to need both order and sales data, so I'm just going to create another query here that focuses on sales, and I'll dump that in. This query is a little bit different. It actually does not need to emit the result set to a data point, because this query is specifically designed to be requested or triggered, if you will, from the WebView client dynamically on an as-needed basis. And you'll see that because of that, this is actually a parameterized query. We're going to be running this SQL, and it will be expecting that an employee ID argument is passed from the WebView client. So I do not need a trigger for this query, and I believe that's all I need to do. So let me just create that one. And two other queries that I'm going to do. This one is used to access order information by employee number. And again, I do not need to emit that because it's going to be requested by the WebView client as needed. And then finally, the same thing on one more query here. This one is order details by order ID, which will allow me to select an order and then illustrate or show details, product and unit information for that query. So I've now created the 5 different queries that I need: all customers, all employees, sales, and order information. So I'm done with this configuration screen, and I don't need that text window anymore, so I'll just minimize that. One other thing that I need to do just before I jump back to WebView is make sure that the Northwind database is available to my WebView client. So I'm just going to hit turn that on and hit apply so that that becomes available to my WebView client. Okay, and I'm ready to jump back to WebView here. And just to make sure that I now have complete access to that Northwind domain, I'm just going to rerun or refresh, if you will, everything within WebView so that I've got access to that Northwind domain. And of course, I'm on a brand new page. So if this is working correctly, I should be able to start by adding a list box to my screen. And there is a sample list box populated with sample data. And of course, I do not want this to be bound to a sample set of script information. I'm actually going to change this and bind it to a point, and I want to actually bind it to all employees, the result of the query that we ran on DataHub. And you can see that sure enough, it has actually returned something here. And you'll notice that because this is actually returning the results of a query, there are several different fields within this result set, and at this point this list box only knows how to render one of them at any given time. So we need to specify a display member path, and I'm going to choose to display either employee ID, or in this case it probably makes sense to display the first name of the employee. And so there you go, there is a list box that now is pulling data from that Microsoft Access database. Just in passing, I'm going to notice that the selected value path is not going to be set, which basically means when I select a employee from this list, the value of the list box will actually take on the entire value of that row, which is of course going to be all of the employee information, which is exactly what I want. The next thing I want to do is write a piece of script that is going to execute whenever the user actually selects an item in here. So I'm just going to navigate down to the custom events property and choose on selection changed. And I'm just going to paste a little piece of script code that I have saved, and I'll dump it in there, and I just want to walk you through this very briefly. You'll notice that what this is going to do is first of all be triggered when the user changes the selection in the list box. It's going to grab the value of it's going to grab the selected value property of this control. And if you haven't seen this notation before, you'll recall that the @selected_value is basically the same as using a simple binding in WebView. And because I did not indicate any kind of a control name here, it's simply going to be a self-reference. So in essence, @selected_value is really just referring back to that property right there of itself. So moving on, it's going to check to first of all ensure that if the employee is not null, if there is a selected employee, we're going to set a local variable or a local data point, if you will, to that employee variable. So I'm going to set a global dynamic variable to the employee. I'm also going to set a second variable called selected employee ID to the employee ID of that employee. And you'll recall that there was a lot of information that came back for each employee, the first name, the last name, the employee ID, notes, their status, all those kinds of things. And then finally what I want to do is run 2 DataHub queries to request sales and order information whenever the employee ID changes. And so I'm going to indicate that this is the name of the query that I want to execute. I'm going to pass my employee ID argument, and I'm requesting that the results of the query populate a local data point called sales by employee. And so just to refresh your memory here, you'll recall that we had created under our data logging tab a query. There we go. We created a query called, right there, sales by employee ID. So that's really what I'm referencing here. NW_sales by employee ID is this query, and you'll recall that there is the argument that is being expected. So this is really simply saying go ahead and run this query, and I'll just minimize that again. And of course this is doing the same thing. This function here, run query, is coming from a piece of script that I have added to the server. And with the addition of new scripting capability in DataHub WebView, one of the things that we've done, of course, is to allow you to add script to any event. You can add scripts to the page. There's a lot of different places you can do it. Well, one of the other things that you can do is actually add scripts to files sitting on your server, just like you would have images sitting on your server. And you'll notice that in this case, there's actually a few different scripts that have been added, some that provide helper routines for animation, and this one here that I'm using, webRequest.ss, which is simply a helper that takes the name of the query, the arguments, and the data point returned, and it fires off a secure database request via DataHub. So let me just go back here to the properties of this. And so now that I've got this script completed, I'm just going to very quickly jump into run mode and confirm that I'm able to select items in this list box. And if this is working correctly, what it should be doing is not only requesting that information from the server, but obviously also selecting or setting the value of the selected employees. So now when I come along and I add some labels to the screen here, I should be able to bind those labels using a script to information from that employee. So for example, let me just grab the employee from this global variable, selected employee, and if the employee is not equal to null, then I'll simply grab the first name of the employee, otherwise I'll output an empty string. And you can see that that has definitely worked. And if I now duplicate that control, and let's just grab, instead of Stephen, let's just grab the title of that employee. And so we can see that Stephen is a sales manager. I should also be able to add an image. So let me just quickly grab an image control and I'll move that up there. And you'll notice that what I've actually done, let me just grab this and show you. I've actually added the PNG files for each of the 9 employees to the local images folder for my WebView server. And I've put them in a folder called Northwind, and you'll notice that the names of the files they kind of have a pattern: employee ID, and then the number, and then .png. So I can use that information to construct a path to the appropriate file. So let me just grab a little piece of script code that's going to use that, and once again I will specify in script the value associated with the relevant employee. And so you can see that Stephen has now been selected. And just to confirm that this is working, I go in, and as I choose a different employee, that's going to fetch the appropriate image from the server, and it obviously is updating the name and title associated with that employee. So the next thing that I want to do is see if we can actually get that pie chart and the data table to work. So I'm going to add a series chart control, and let me just resize that a little bit. And I'm going to specify that I want to grab a data point. So in script, I will again say that I want to access sales by employee ID, and I want to use the table data for that. What am I missing here? Oh, missing a closing parenthesis. I want to access the table data for that. You'll notice that, let me just quickly here to illustrate, I'm going to add a text box to my screen. You can see that the chart has actually grabbed the data appropriately. I'm going to actually grab a text box and bind that to the data point all employees, just to help you understand how this works. There's the actual data that lives in the data point right now. So normally, of course, we're used to seeing something like, I'll just add PV for example here. We're used to seeing something like a data PID value, which of course is just a numeric value that's updating in real time, and this PV is coming from the data PID sample data program. Well, this is no different here. This text box is actually just accessing table data from the Northwind database via that all employees data point that we had populated back on our DataHub query. Well, the data actually comes back as structured XML, and right now I'm using a text box just to render the data as text, but the pie chart actually uses that table data and interprets it or parses it via XML, and is able to obviously parse it correctly into different kinds of chart data that it needs. So I'm just going to use a pie chart, and I'll just add a little bit more information here. We'll give it a title of sales by country, and I may as well just turn on my chart legend for that guy. Finally, I now should be able to go back and add my data table that I'm going to use to display my order information. So I'm going to bind this data table to the results of my other temporary query, which you will recall was entitled Get Orders by Employee ID. So let me just paste that in there and hit apply, and you'll notice that as soon as I've done that, it did in fact go out and grab the appropriate data which was returned as a result of that query. So now as I click on an employee, I should see their updated profile, I should see that my pie chart updates, and I should see that my order information updates. And finally, I have another version of this same page, and I have just added a few finishing touches to it. So there is my finished product of my employee order dashboard. I've just obviously added a little bit more information for the employee profile. I still have the same list box that updates a data table of order information and my pie chart, but I've added just a couple other little things to illustrate. Right now, if I select an order, I can actually see the details of that order as well. And so I've got a little bit of animation here that changes the size and some of the properties associated with this data grid, and adds a second data grid with product information. And of course, the key to all this is being able to render data changes in WebView that are made in the ODBC database. So just as an example, you'll notice that as I navigate through the different employees, some of them have status information. There's Robert King away from his desk, or Janet is working hard. Well, if I go over to my Microsoft Access database, I can see there's the status information, and you'll notice that if I change the status information for these employees, then of course it's going to be updated in DataHub WebView right away. So that concludes the video blog. I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.